So getting into kind of the mechanics of seed starting, it's just 4 steps. You're going to be sowing the seed. You're going to be waiting for the seed to pop out, which is germination. You're going to have a growth phase, which is going to take the most amount of time while you're letting that seedling get strong. And then you're going to harden it off. And then, but for any seed you're starting, this is the process. And I'll go through each one of these steps one by one. So sowing, you're putting a seed in dirt and you're covering it up, and that's it. And but there are some things that you're going to want to think about. You don't want it to be very deep, and the reason you don't want it to be very deep is because you want it to feel. You want the seed to feel the warmth of the temperature of the room that you're in. So if you have a nice warm room, you don't need any sunlight during the sowing of their germination, but what you do need is temperature. So if you seed kind of close to the surface and cover it up, it'll get that nice constant temperature and it'll signal the seed to open up and grow. You're going to want to cover it lightly with soil mix, like I said, close to the surface. And you're going to water it in. The most important phase, part of sowing is what growers like to think of as soil to seed contact. And it's that soil to seed contact with no air around it that also signals the seed to grow. So you're going to want to bury it lightly, and then as soon as you've got that seed uncovered, get a layer of water over it so everything just kind of compacts together and the seed's touching the damp soil on all sides. So the germination phase is where the plants pop from the soil. These are onions growing. And what you need for this to happen is a constant temperature. You have a lot of growers who like to use seed mats, where you've got this rubber mat and it's got a thermostat on it, and you can set it at 70 or 80 degrees, and it'll keep your seeds at a constant temperature. I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but it's a nice way to do it. As long as you know that the room where the seeds are at are under a fairly steady temperature, you'll be fine. For most seeds, it takes about 2 to 3 days for, once you sow it and get it watered in. And after that, it's a little bit of a waiting game. After the plants emerge, though, that's when you're going to start thinking about sunlight. So the goal of the growth phase is a strong plant. And this is, a cucumber or a squash plant of some kind. And it's right at that phase where it's ready to be put outside. You've got a nice, strong plant there, good color. It's had a good, healthy inside life. So plan for 2 to 3 weeks at a minimum inside your house. And, for those of you who are taking notes, if I'm going really fast, just tell me to slow down and I will, or I'll repeat. So plan for 2 to 3 weeks, and then this is a real important part, consistent water. You don't at any point after you have that initial water on your seedlings, you don't want to let it dry out. Maximum sunlight is for the best results. You're really trying to, think of it in terms of you have these plants in a nursery. You want to really give them, the max amount of care, and having a ton of sunlight is really going to help. Hardening off. Is anyone here not familiar with what hardening off is? Is that okay? Good. So hardening off is kind of a technical term for setting your plants outside and kind of acclimating them to the outside world. So generally 3 or 4 days before you put the plant in the ground in its permanent spot, you're just going to want to get it outside. And a couple reasons. It's going to get the plants used to temperature changes. It's going to introduce the plant to the wind. And the plant will actually become stronger. It's going to start building some physical structure to be able to handle the wind. But a super important part of hardening off is that you can still bring it in while the plants are weak. So if you have the plants outside hardening off, and you're going to get a hot day or a frost night, or there's 20 miles an hour of wind coming through, just bring them back inside. So, nutrition. And what do you specifically want to be using in your garden containers when you're starting? What you don't want to use is soil from your backyard. And there are a couple different reasons. It doesn't drain well. You've got a lot of rock content. You've got a lot of decomposed plant material. The water doesn't move through it well, and that's pretty important. So it drains poorly, might be full of weed seeds. Can anyone here tell me how long weed seeds stay in the ground?
Forever.
50 years. If you see weeds coming out of the ground, those weeds may have been blown in there 50 years ago. So there's no point in using garden soil to start your plants. And you'll see if you ever do this, you're going to get a bunch of weed seeds, and then you're going to have your own little seed coming out. So might as well not start the plant competing. So it also may contain mold or disease, and it may or may not. But I still like the idea of starting seeds with just a fresh medium to grow it in. So use a potting mix specific for.
Lead.
Oh, please.
Also lead, right?
It depends. So it depends on if you have if you have a brick house here in Oak Park or where my place is in Chicago, and it was never painted on the exterior, there's a chance you don't have lead in your soil or heavy metals. But if you have one of the old Victorians or some of the big beautiful frame houses around here that may have been scraped 4 or 5 times over the course of its life, that paint's in the soil. So I wouldn't necessarily assume there's lead, but you can't rule it out either. It depends on the hole.
You can test it very extensively, right?
You sure can. Oh yeah, and that's something that you could do through, Illinois, our University of Illinois Extension. They have all kinds of information for where to send it. And so, potting mix won't have weed seeds. It's built specifically to drain, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There are pluses and minuses to how well the water moves through it. It's generally really high in nutrition when you first plant into it. So you're getting, the seed's going to be getting a good shot of nutrition from the get-go with this potting mix.
Can I ask something?
Please.
So if I'm making my own compost, it's very nice and nutritious.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way I can clean it, say, and use it for growing plants? Is it a way that I can make my own potting soil so I don't have to buy the plastic bags and plastic bags?
There is. What I would do is there are plenty of websites, where you can see what a good recipe for potting mix is. A lot of it will be compost, but you're going to want to add a couple other things. Specifically, there's a material called perlite or vermiculite, are 2 things that help the water drain through. So if you were to look online, you could easily find. Say again?
I have an easy recipe if you want to make your own potting soil.
Okay, so Lissa has a good recipe, but if you have your own compost, you definitely could. Yes?
On the previous slide you had, don't use potting mix.
Do use a potting mix.
Do you?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay. So water. A couple things to think specifically about water when you have seedlings. Your drainage, how often do you water, and when do you water? So let's talk about drainage. You don't want the container to, at any point, be puddling. The water's got to be able to move through. If you're not using the soil from your backyard, you should be fine. The water needs a place to go. There's definitely going to need to be some kind of hole in the bottom. Like on that seed flat that I have there, every cell has a hole in the bottom so the water can move through. If you're growing in a Dixie cup, if you're growing in a solo cup, just make sure that you have some kind of drainage available for it. So too much water is actually a bad thing. You'll flood the plant out, or it won't germinate in the first place. So how often do you want to water it? Only enough to where the soil stays moist. And that doesn't mean that you have to stay home, the whole time with a mister in your hand. Generally what you can do is water in the morning and check it again in the afternoon. You'll probably have to add then. If your seeds are in a place where there's really nice sunlight, it's going to naturally be drying that potting mix. It's going to heat up the soil mix, and it's going to dry out pretty quickly. But if you water it in the morning and then once again in the afternoon, you really shouldn't have to think about it, unless you're in a place where the sun's really intense.
So is it better to spray it rather than pour it?
I'm a big fan of pouring it because I know that I'm getting a good volume of water. I feel like whenever I've used a mister, I can't really gauge how much I put. And I don't know if I'm watering just the top quarter inch or if I'm getting the whole thing wet. If I water it and I can see water coming out the bottom, I know I've watered it.
What about soaking the seed prior to putting it in the soil to help it sprout?
So I think that there are some seeds that that's actually a great idea for, specifically the ones that really take a long time to germinate. If I know, though, that the seed's going to come up predictably in 2 to 3 days, I wouldn't mess with it. Any seed pack is going to have time to germination on it. But let's say you're planting, some kind of a bean plant or a pea plant or something where it's a large seed that it may take a week to come out. I would soak those. I don't think there's any harm in it. And the cool thing about it is that if they're a nice large size, you're not messing around with this tiny seed. They're just real easy to manipulate. So I think for some seeds it's a great idea. So soil mix dries out. That's the thing, and I call it soil mix. The funny thing about calling soil mix, exactly that, there's no soil in it. It's all going to be compost, or it's going to be certain kinds of large particle rocks so that the water can move through it. But because it's generally a lot of organic matter, it dries out quickly. So you just really want to have a little bit of an awareness that when you water it in the morning, you're not watering it for the whole day. You're going to have to look at it. Please.
Have you ever tried the little peat pods?
I have tried it, but not on a large scale.
Okay.
But when I've done it, I've tried them a couple times when they came out. I've also tried the that crushed coconut fiber.
Yeah.
I think both of them work great.
Okay.
So where I would worry about the peat or the coconut fiber is I don't really know what kind of nutrition is built in there. But as far as something that's great for holding a seed and holding water, they're good. So the timing of your water we touched on a little bit, but it really does help to be kind of flexible with how you water. For those first couple days, if you just kind of touch your soil and see where you're at, you'll get a good feel of how often in your particular place you'll need to be watering these. So I like morning and afternoon. That's typically how I did it. When the sun got really strong, though, sometimes I would water them at night too, but generally I think morning and afternoon works well.